Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm
still a piece of garbage.
And it has been a hot minute since our last mingle, hasn't it? We're already what? At least a month into the new year? Crazy how that happened, huh? I hope you all had a great time over the holidays and that you are well rested for the new year. I know it's going to be a doozy for me. So I figured the best way to start the year was to recap what made up the largest percentage of my time on YouTube last year, and take a look at someone who had a very similar idea to mine but with a drastically different way of going about it. Like, I'm talking the difference between a bag of dynamite and your mom after Taco Tuesday. It's not like I haven't been planning this since my first video started coming out or anything, but oh no. Yes folks, today I'm going to be going for the gold medal in the Winter Olympics as I plummet my large and intimidating figure several feet into the icy cold pool of one of the most heavily disagreed upon videos in this community of people with too much time on their hands and not enough grass under their shoes. At least to my knowledge. And while this may be seen as me going after some low-hanging fruit, I'd like to think there are still some interesting things to say about Cosmo's opinion on these films, while I effortlessly and shamelessly beat my own meat in celebration of me actually knowing what I'm talking about. After all, he got the spirit, but he's just a little confused. The idea that Spider-Man 2 and the Raimi trilogy as a whole are not as well written as hoped is steadily becoming a more accepted opinion amongst those in my circles, as well as with people who think the MCU's depiction of everybody's favorite Rihanna backup dancer is the best. A distasteful view of thought I once held myself. So is this video really that bad? Kinda. It has a few good points thrown around here and there, but at the same time it is incredible how inaccurate some of the things he says actually are. But what exactly did he get so wrong, and where did he make the correct assessments? How bad is this video really? Well, before I rummage around this virtual bin of ideas, I'd like to make an announcement first.
Here comes a new challenger!
Presto fucking Bajesto! Bam! There it is.
Say hello to Shandy 2.0, a combined effort between myself and the oh-so-lovely Madvocate who kindly helped me refine this image to its dazzling spectacle. He also made this absolutely gorgeous Detective Shandy which, along with the red-headed stepchild Shandy, will be a regular appearance in these videos as I sniff out cringe and bad writing alike. A link to his channel is in the description. He is nearly at 100,000 subs, so please feel free to share the love and show your support. He'd appreciate it, and so would I. Now with this newly found power, I shall descend into the darkness to seek that of which I crave answers for. Was he right? So Cosmo's video is a 26 to 27 minute review of all three Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, starring America's favorite gambling sweetheart, Tobey Maguire, though the ladies refer to him as the cool youth pastor. And speaking as someone who has covered all three of these films in extensive depth, some would say too much to the point that it's actually unnecessary, I can firmly say, that length is kinda small.
Yikes.
It seems like a monumental task to be able to prove these movies are worse than I remember with a thumbnail like this, but I'm sure he can manage something. After all, we miss every shot we don't take, but we also kill every puppy we drown, so let's cool it with that pep talk while the body is still warm. I would also like to make a clarification. I understand that Marcus's entire brand is that of a sarcastic arsehole and that not every one of his points will in fact be genuine. I understand that attempts at jokes can and will be made, so I will try my best not to butter my biscuit on this video too hard. However, with that said, just because a point is or can be seen as a joke, doesn't then mean it is an accurate one. People laugh at stinkers all the time. Just look at how popular that Far From Home movie was. No amount of lost Forerunner technology will ever be powerful enough to convince me people didn't think this was weapons grade plutonium, and yet it made like all of the money. Which is a really awake, rake, man, Wow. Holy shit. But back on track. But back on topic. Much like this projectile vomit, Marcus's video is both seen as really popular and also sucking the big pee-pee. So I'm here today to find out just how much of that pee-pee was sucked. For science, of course. Don't want any of you Eastern Greys getting any ideas now, would we?
Yes!
But enough said, let's get cracking!
God damn it.
Oh, but before we do, I just want to make it clear that I will be pausing a lot to counter or contribute to something he said, sometimes even in the middle of his sentences. That's because he speaks a lot and talks very fast, so I try to get in some licks before he blabbers on too much. Apologies if this comes off as me not letting him speak for himself, but if you really care so much, then I'll let you cuties make up your own mind and go watch this video in full to see if I was being unfair. Link is in the description. Okay, bye!
He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
Does whatever a spider can, spins away.
Whenever I post a video at least partially related to Spider-Man, I always get vultures flying down yelling at me about how Homecoming isn't that good. Spider-Man 2 is better. Tom Holland can suck my dick.
Yeah, I get what you mean. When I finished my first Spider-Man video, I had a few people in the comments asking me if I was serious for saying Homecoming was better than Spider-Man 1, an opinion I take back now upon revisiting the film for a second time, so I am no stranger to this experience, although maybe not to the same extent as you are. But now, thanks to the benefit of hindsight, as well as not having a permanent case of lizard brain, I can safely say that I agree with the people in your comment section. Homecoming really is not that good, and I aim to explain why in classic shandy detail, hopefully sometime in the near future. However, what about the comparison between Spider-Man 2 and Homecoming? Which do I think is better? Well, after some careful thought as well as reassessing both movies and the context of the world building, I have to say, Spider-Man 2 is not only better made than Homecoming, but it is also drastically more consistent with its lore and world building. Despite all the shit in it, I can at least say it's not then further harmed by an excess of other media across the cinematic universe, which actively destroys the inciting conflict between our main character and the antagonist. Homecoming does an incredibly awful job of accounting for details found in other MCU movies, as well as in the extended material found in TV shows such as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which, like it or not, is still canon to the MCU. Spider-Man 2, on the other hand, really only has one movie, and even if it fucks up every ounce of continuity from that film, it still wouldn't come close to the colossal-sized bucket of KFC Homecoming had to climb in order to be a good film, and it didn't even make it past the mash and gravy. The issue here is that you can't even view Homecoming as a self-contained story in the same vein as Guardians of the Galaxy or Thor Ragnarok, because this movie relies on so much bullshit being ignored or outright forgotten from the previous series of films in order to operate that you can't just say, oh well, it's a solo movie, it doesn't matter what happened in Captain America the First Avenger because this is a different character, when even a film as far removed as that still holds very drastic consequences for this little piece of shit. That's the issue with the connected universes and why it's so hard, allegedly, to keep things consistent, since you have to account for a Wikipedia article's worth of horse Dickens story. It also doesn't help that the movie starts off fucked by getting the details of the dates wrong in this multi-million, billion-dollar franchise, and you couldn't even hire one guy or gal to do a simple fact check? Hire me! Please, I would have done it for free! I feel like I'm losing focus here, but you hopefully get my point. Spider-Man 2 is bad, but at least it's only Mom, I pissed the bed levels of bad, and not Mom, I accidentally deleted my brother's kneecaps playing ice hockey levels of bad. And no amount of Dark Souls 1, Soul Level 1, Twink accounts are going to convince me otherwise. Tom Holland's also cute, but no, he may not suck my dick. That is forbidden in the House of Nut.
So the other day I was like, okay, fine. I haven't seen the Sam Raimi movies in a pretty long time. Maybe I need to refresh my opinions a little bit. So I went ahead, I rewatched the movies, and holy shit, these do not hold up.
I'd say it depends on what lens you are viewing these films through, and if you held them to a consistently high standard when you first viewed them. A few of my mates never really thought these were well written and saw them as silly fun experiences rather than the gripping pieces of high level literature for your eyeballs and balls that some Twitter user would have you believe. It's all about managing your expectations, so if you go in expecting a fun, campy and enjoyable experience, then that is what you will get. If you go in expecting a well written and consistent world, then you are either going going to be sorely disappointed or be so enthralled by your nostalgia goggles that you will flat out ignore the numerous problems on display. Which way, Western man?
Now, I like to think I have a pretty good track record when it comes to my opinions, alright? I have a decent following of naive 11-year-olds, eccentric European weeaboos, and depressed alcoholic college students
Hey, that's me.
that seem to like and listen to my opinions.
Hey, that's not me.
But I'm aware that I'm kinda pushing it this time. I'm just saying, I think the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies aren't as good as you remember.
I guess it just depends on what you seek from these movies. I mean, you even give Spider-Man 1 a 10 out of 10 later on under the lens of viewing it as a comedy film, even though I find your examples to be strange. So if that isn't as good as you remember, Marcus, then does that mean you used to rate it as a 14 out of 10?
Now, I still love these movies, all 3 of them to be exact. Yeah, you heard that right.
Based and bean-pilled at 3 a.m.
But it annoys me that people look at the first 2 as some sort of superhero holy grail, when they're not, like, really that good anymore.
I agree. I think they are severely overrated and in drastic need of re-evaluation under a more strict set of standards. But that doesn't mean you can't still enjoy them, as Marcus himself even puts it. You may think these films aren't as good as you remember, but that doesn't mean that they aren't still incredibly entertaining as long as you can look past the problems, which sadly a lot of people cannot bring themselves to admit. The issue with holding these films to such a high bar for so many years is that it starts becoming harder and harder to accept they were actually flawed in several big ways. I just wonder if you'll be accurate at explaining what they are. He won't. He really won't.
So let's look at all 3 of these movies and see why they really don't hold up and are kind of a little bit, just a little bit, of a mess.
Why are you changing the aspect ratios of some of the clips? It seems like an odd editing decision.
And yeah, I know everybody says Spider-Man 3 is the worst one.
They'd be wrong. It's this one.
But if you ask me, all 3 of these movies are basically the same, and I'll elaborate more on that later.
Okay. Odd thing to say, but I can see some merit in that statement, especially in the first 2 films. What with them essentially reusing the same Mary Jane arc of the first film, but with the added element of her being a giga cunt this time around. But even then, I wouldn't say they are the same film, since their tone, setting, story, themes, and characters are all dramatically different as a result of the last film's ending. And in Spider-Man 3 it happens again, but this time for the better. So good luck with that.
For now, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with Spider-Man 1.
Spider-Wars! Come out and play!
So the first thing we're greeted with is a corny narration by Peter Parker, played by good old American sweetheart Tobey Maguire.
Oof, you really woke up that morning and chose violence, didn't you? I don't see why it's an issue that the film has corny elements, since the entire point was that it was supposed to be reflecting the earlier issues of the Spider-Man comics. The old-fashioned, sentimental nature of those films' dialogue and tone can be felt all throughout its production, to the point where it feels like the unintentional hilarity you will point to in a second was done on purpose in order to have the film be more in line with the cheesy elements of the comics, making the overall aesthetic of the film being more in line with a fairy tale than an actual grounded story. The narration also allows the audience to get inside the head of Peter before we even see his face, achieving the goal of setting up his relationship with his world, his main love interest, establishing his role in society, as well as getting a general understanding of how he views himself. In short,
didn't ask, don't need it, go fuck yourself.
And this is the one thing that I hate the most about the Spider-Man trilogy. I hate Tobey Maguire. Ever since I was a kid, I never really saw him as my definitive Peter Parker. He's kind of meek and wimpy, and that's supposed to be Peter's personality at first, but he never really gets over it. Even when he's Spider-Man, I still want to kick his ass because he's a huge dork.
I mean, I get it, but that's just his character. Like, I understand why you don't like this interpretation of Peter Parker, but I don't understand why you view one of his core characteristics as bad simply because you don't like him. Now, you explain who he is, what he does, but you never say why that's a problem. And it's not like you can't give examples, I'll be giving you one in a second, but the idea that you simply just state something as if it is a fact and then don't explain why it is incredibly cringe.
My spidey senses tell me this is gonna get fucking tasty, baby!
But to steelman your, argumente, Let me give you an example of a situation where Peter was incredibly dorky for literally no reason. This phone call in Spider-Man 2. In the scene prior to this, Peter was late to MJ's play as he had to stop a car chase in progress, and as a result wasn't allowed into the theater. Sticky situations we have on our hands, wouldn't you then say? Now, based on scenes from the previous film, we understand that Peter is a decently capable liar, even when under pressure, which makes sense as it is an invaluable skill to have as a masked vigilante. So, based on previous information awarded to us in a prequel film, we understand that Peter has the capacity to come up with a decent lie on the spot, where in this situation he had the entire night to think of something. To further sweeten the lie, Peter also carried home his only method of non-Spidey related transportation, meaning he had further evidence to support him being late, using a reasonable alibi without having to tell the whole truth. So, with the skills of an experienced liar and the added benefit of physical evidence, what do you think he did to get himself out of this problem? He made it significantly worse on himself by blaming his late arrival on the usher. Because Peter is really intelligent, guys. This conversation then bleeds into another confrontation during the high society party almost midway into the film, causing him even more heartache and pain. And the only excuse I could make for this lapse in judgment is that Peter was just being an incredibly awkward dork, since I guess Goblin blew his nuts off as well as a third of his brain in the last movie.
It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind.
And sometimes Tobey's performance is just really bad. There are some actors doing a really good job in these movies, so you really notice when somebody isn't doing that great of a job.
I agree with the sentiment, with my prime example being Harry in the second film, but I wouldn't slot Peter into this category. I think Tobey does a great job at portraying the shy, dorky attitude of Peter Parker in these movies. So if his delivery comes off as cringe, sorry to say, but that should be seen as a good thing. This isn't an Anakin Skywalker situation where his dialogue is unintentionally cringe because the writing is broken.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
But rather a situation where an actor is successfully portraying a socially awkward loser, since that's how the character is written by design. It would actually be out of place if you didn't want to bully Tobey, seeing that it means the character writing has failed to successfully convince you this version of Peter is the dork everyone picks on. This portrayal of the character is also consistent in the second film, for better and for worse, with the third film being the one to break the mold as Peter starts crawling out of his shell due in large part to the extensive amount of public praise he is receiving. But this didn't mean he'd stop being a goofball.
Who am I? You sure you want to know?
Blech.
You are made of stupid.
Also, at the mere 6-minute mark, we are shown the greatest character in the entire trilogy, Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn.
Second best, but solid pick.
I'll get more into him later, though. For now, let's look at how Harry introduces his dad.
Peter, may I introduce my father, Norman Osborn?
Why would you introduce your dad by his full name? That's kind of weird, but whatever.
Because it's respectful and lines up with how Norman values his status as a man of importance, a trait which gets further explored later in the film. Honestly, the issue you should be taking away from this scene is, why was this the first time Peter and Norman met with each other when Harry was supposed to be friends with Peter for ages? But even then, you can excuse that tiny detail and simply accept that this was just the chosen method of introducing Norman as a character to the audience rather than to Peter, since Peter already knows who Norman is thanks to reading his papers on nanotechnology.
Also, look at these high school students. Now, I know a lot of movies have people who aren't really playing their age, but this is kind of ridiculous. You see this guy? That's supposed to be their teacher. He's younger than they are.
Well, you are only like half right. Sure, the actors playing the supposed 18-year-olds are a little older than advertised, but their teacher is still older than most of the students. Joe this guy, the actor who played Flash, was only 24 during filming. Tobey Maguire was 25. James Franco was 22. The actor who played the teacher, Shane Omar Huey, yes, was 28 years old. The only actor who was older is arguably one of the students who looks the youngest, Jason Paget, who was 29 during filming.
I gotta say though, I love how every line this man says is whispered and sounds very aggressive and threatening.
The next person who talks will fail this course. I kid you not. Do you know that this is the largest electron microscope on the eastern seaboard? You were talking throughout that woman's entire presentation.
I mean, yeah, He is currently touring the inside of Columbia University during a presentation of potential life-changing science. It would be fucking rude if his students kept interrupting.
So anyway, Peter gets bitten by some brown recluse and then he dies peacefully in his sleep.
It's funny because it's true.
So in the next scene, we get the beginnings of Norman Osborn's supervillain origin story. And I gotta say, I do like the pacing in this movie for the most part. Things go along in a fairly well-balanced way. You see the beginning of Peter's origin, and then right after you see the beginning of the villain's origin. It just keeps going back and forth like this. However, his motivations aren't really that clear before he turns into a crazy monster person.
Well then, allow Detective Shandy to solve that issue for you. In this scene, Norman has been given an ultimatum. Perform a successful human trial without any issues within a given time frame, or else all of his funding for this experiment will be made void and given to another company. This is an issue for Norman for a few reasons. Firstly, he has spent God knows how many hours of his life working firsthand on this formula and glider technology. So the idea that the fruits of his labor wouldn't be made bare despite his high effort would be shattering for any scientist or creator. An example here for you, Marcus, would be if you had spent months of your life working hard on a video only to have all of the footage become corrupted because of some faulty Windows update. The same feeling you would have at that discovery is more or less what Norman would feel. The second reason would be that Norman doesn't handle disappointment well and can't stand the idea of mediocrity, which is why he is so hard on Harry throughout the film's runtime and why he takes a liking towards Peter. Harry even makes this clear in his first lines with Peter.
It doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah, not if you're a genius. I think he wants to adopt you.
This is what leads to his split personality, the Goblin, killing off any and all members of this business which have wronged or slighted him in any way, because Goblin is a petty bitch. So, to summarize, Norman's motivation for doing this experiment in secret is that he wants to avoid embarrassment and losing his funding, as well as it sucking some major donkey dick if he was just fired like that without warning or lube.
He seems mad that they're taking the project back to formula.
Back to formula.
I'm a dumb internet movie boy, so I don't know what that means, but it seems like he needs to get his little science project done really quickly or the army men won't be very happy with him.
The idea of going back to formula means that the serum used during the Goblin procedure was so unstable that they literally needed to scrap the entire project and start again from scratch. It means that before they can even create the green Goblin juice the serum comes in, they would need to essentially recreate the recipe for making it in the first place, testing it in simulations while they redesign its structure. Think Tony Stark creating a new element using his holograms in Iron Man 2. The reason for why this news is angering the members of the military such as General Slow Coombe is because they have invested a large amount of money into this experiment already and don't think the results are worth any more money being wasted, which is why they threaten to pull the funding if they don't see any results. Slow Coombe also has the added layer of personal distaste to Norman as an individual, giving him personal satisfaction when he's able to say, Kiko, fuck yourself.
Next we see the first scene of what I'm going to call corny Sam Raimi shit.
And just like that, I hold my bated breath as I wait for you to give me a tangible reason for why the corny elements of this movie are a problem.
Introduce 15 genetically designed super spiders.
Why are there skulls? It looks like I added those in post, but that's for real. This is fucking hilarious, and it only gets better from here. The next scene is even funnier. Norman goes ahead and decides he's gonna be the human test subject, and this fucking doormat just goes along with it.
You were this close to making a good point. This scene has issues, such as Norman having the means to conduct the test safely with multiple eyewitnesses and staff to help mitigate human error on his part, meaning the fact he does this experiment so hastily is unnecessary even for someone with a 2-week window. The issue isn't that the scene is funny.
Oh, I guess I'll just clean up the broken glass, asshole. Also, I think this little part is hilarious.
I mean, okay, alright, sure. I personally don't find it funny because the nature of the scene is tense by design, as you have the accidental creation of a madman and the murder of a scientist, but I guess humor is subjective. I'm still just waiting to find out why this is a problem.
Well, either way, the experiment goes horribly wrong and he dies. What?
Back to formula.
This is a comedy movie. I don't care what anybody tells me.
Yeah, sure. Whatever you say, Schizo.
Now you guys know the rest. I won't nitpick the rest of this first act because that would be way too easy.
Oh, you mean the part where you explain why this movie isn't as good as I remember instead of saying something is funny without any explanation? You're going to skip over the part of the video I actually came here for?
Sonic game ever. Idiot!
Like, I could mention how Peter's just gonna walk to school, but then the bus just appears and he's like, oh no, wait, I'm supposed to run after the bus. Like, what the fuck? You weren't even going to the bus stop. It's your own fault if you miss it now.
Yeah, it's not like there is already an establishing shot in this movie which shows the bus driver enjoying messing with Peter. Yeah, no, it's all just Peter's fault.
And I'm most definitely not gonna mention this unfortunately aged joke.
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
What if you did make it for him? Would that be so bad? Wow, Spider-Man, you're pretty homophobic.
You say unfortunately aged, I say well matured. We are not the same.
But one thing that does bug me is the pivotal scene where Uncle Ben gives his iconic speech. Because he's actually chastising Peter Parker for fighting Flash Thompson in a previous scene. Except Peter was fighting in self-defense, and Uncle Ben's like, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that. Just because you can beat him up doesn't mean you should. So what does Peter do with this advice? He spends the rest of his life beating people up. The context just don't make no sense.
This just shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the scene, and I'm sorry to have to sound like I have a foot up my ass for this one, but it's true. You either ignored what was actually being said and done in the scene, or you failed to grasp what Uncle Ben was trying to do and say. Ben is having this conversation with Peter because he fears that Pete is changing into a man he wouldn't be proud of, while trying to steer him towards the path of responsibility. Not just for his power, but also for his actions, which is why he chastises him for beating Flash up in such a manner. He urges him to use his newly found abilities, whatever they may be, in a manner that is, for lack of a better word, ethical. He isn't discouraging him from fighting people, especially if it wasn't self-defense, but rather that he doesn't do it for the wrong reasons. This lesson gets further ingrained into Peter when he learns the hard way that Uncle Ben was trying to teach him, that a man with power should never use it for self-indulgent reasons, lest he face the consequences of his actions. This leads to Peter using his abilities to save people who can't protect themselves, because he has the power to make a difference, falling in line with Uncle Ben's philosophy.
However, on an unrelated note, I think it's time to bring up something that I love about these movies. And that's the extras. I'm serious, look in the background of any shot and just find a random person. You'll get a whole new level of entertainment out of these movies. In this movie, you'll see background characters that don't give a shit, people who have no idea where they are. Even main characters have a chance of devolving into idle sims when they're not the focus of the scene.
While I agree that side characters are incredibly entertaining to view, with my personal favorites being these two chuckle fucks from Spider-Man 3, you kinda seem to misunderstand the purpose of Harry going idle here, which seems to be a running theme for you in this video. You point things out that you find to be particularly humorous or confusing and then fail to elaborate further. That, or you fundamentally misunderstand character moments, such as your failure to analyze the Uncle Ben scene, and now again with Harry. In this scene, Harry and Peter are both graduating from high school, with Peter winning the science award along with his matriculation. Yes, Darth, that's an actual word, you bitch. As a result of this, Norman diverts any and all attention he was paying Harry over to Peter because he finds Peter more worthy of his praise than his own son. Something we see here when he says,
"It's not the first time I've been proven wrong. Congratulations. Peter, the Science Award. That's terrific."
Yeah.
What this tells us about their relationship is that Norman struggled to view Harry as anything more than a failure, not even confident enough in his ability to pass high school, a dynamic which has been building since they first seen. Norman doesn't have this issue with Peter as he views him like the son he wishes Harry was, something Harry recognizes and holds against Peter in the sequel films in the form of a grudge. This is why he goes idle here, since he knows he is no longer the center of his father's attention and thus leaves the scene because of it. I don't know what you think his reasons for leaving were, but I assume it's something along the lines of
flashback. This is a comedy movie. I don't care what anybody tells me. End of flashback.
And now for something completely different.
It is really bizarre. So for those of you who aren't aware by now, this movie has a certain flow to it. We see Peter do stuff, and then we see Norman do stuff. And then Peter and Norman meet up again, and the whole thing goes on like that until the movie's over. And this works mostly because, like I said, Norman Osborn is fucking hilarious.
I mean, sure, if that's what does it for you. For me, the reason why the pacing of this film works so well is because of the dynamic Peter and Norman share. We see their struggles and triumphs side by side as they are the two integral characters to the story. Peter being the yin to Norman's yang, or however that fortune cookie philosophy goes. The reason why this works is thanks in large part to the audience always being aware of where each character is in their lives respectively. Peter is facing heartache and grief over Uncle Ben's death, while Norman is taking revenge on General Slocum. Norman is having an identity crisis. Hey, look at that! Peter is forging one for his public and private lives by getting a job as a photographer. This dynamic then leads to being a confrontational high point several times in the story when Goblin and Spidey come to blows, since now their struggles and triumphs come as a direct result of meeting each other, rather than simply happening at the same time. That's why this relationship works in my eyes, because it builds upon the premise of their dynamic and allows for growth going forwards, impacting their decisions and reactions right up until Norman dies in the finale. However, despite being dead, Norman still heavily affects Peter's life, even in the next two films, showing just how good that dynamic was. Norman is funny, don't get me wrong, but his ability to make me laugh isn't his only defining factor for why he is such an endearing character in this film.
Maybe it's just me, but every scene with him makes me laugh. He could be doing something completely normal, and it's still hilarious to me. It's like Willem Dafoe is an alien pretending to be a human.
Peter, the Science Award. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Say fuck me. And then I'll leave. Say fuck me.
Spider-Man!
I am now going to share some of my favorite moments from Norman Osborn in this movie. I like the reaction he has when Harry offers Peter to work for him.
Me too!
He looks so happy. Look at his face. I don't even need to describe this part. It kind of speaks for itself.
You don't even know how many problems this fucking deployable sleep gas creates, but you probably didn't notice because you were too busy laughing at Norman being a gremlin, I guess.
I love how his whole plan to recruit Spider-Man is to drug him, kidnap him, tie him up, and have a dad talk with him on a rooftop about how New Yorkers are dicks and they're not worth saving.
Me too!
Right.
I like how he dresses up as an old lady, complete with a stock sound effect, just so he can get the jump on Spider-Man.
Me too!
And then the scene ends with this great line.
No one says no to me!
Sometimes he just shows up for no reason, like this jump scare.
But that's the only time he shows up for no reason. If you were planning on using his attack on Aunt May as an example, then that would be a problem because he does attack her for a reason. He outlines that reason during their conversation after the Thanksgiving scene. You just put that scene up on screen for a few seconds. How did you not notice him saying this?
What do I do?
Instruct him in the matters of loss and pain. Make him suffer. Make him wish he were dead.
Yes.
And then grant his wish.
But how?
The cunning warrior attacks neither body nor mind.
Tell me how!
The heart, Osborn. First, we attack his heart.
The fuck?
However, a character in these movies that I do not like is Aunt May. Aunt May has the worst pep talks in this movie.
Have you ever heard something so wrong before that you literally feel like your brain needs a manual reboot before it can start functioning again? Like, I'm talking full-on factory resetting that bitch because of how wrong something was. I just hope he gives a good enough reason for why these are the worst pep talks he has ever heard, but I hold my breath.
I can't help thinking about the last thing I said to him. He tried to tell me something important, and I threw it in his face.
You loved him.
Wow, she's so wise.
I swear you have the attention span of a snake leather jacket worn by Nick Cage. How do you use one line of dialogue from an entire scene as the defining factor for why her pep talks are bad, you scrungy mongoose? And let's look at this talk, why don't we? What exactly was being said here, and why was it said at all? The scene takes place right after Peter's graduation inside his bedroom. Peter is crying because of how much he misses Uncle Ben, who by this point is dead in the story, and wished he was present during his graduation. Aunt May comforts him and says that she also misses him, but that he was still present at the graduation, likely a reference to his spirit or essence. This leads to Peter explaining why he feels guilty about the last thing he said to Uncle Ben before he died, as most sane people would. Aunt May reassures him that Uncle Ben never lost faith in Peter as a person, and knew that they loved each other, that he knew Peter would grow up to do great things and be the man he always knew he could be. This is reassuring for Peter because it means that he didn't ruin his relationship with his uncle before he died, and gives him the fortitude to uphold his memory by becoming Spider-Man. Now you could argue that Peter was going to make this choice with or without May's help, although as is common practice in these motion pictures going forwards, May as a character is usually the person responsible for helping Peter make the right choices in life. So I'm more than comfortable in giving her the credit for Peter's choice in this moment. What makes May so wise in these scenes is that she usually tells Peter exactly what he needs to hear in order to move on with his life without being overbearing about it. Like most Spider-Man stories, May is typically depicted as Peter's rock, the only element of his life which keeps him grounded and able to move on even through the hardest of times. A key trait which is very present in this film. So I have no idea how in the back alley corpse finding fuck you managed to come to the conclusion that she is the worst character in these films. That's just so fucking stupid.
Aunt May is supposed to be Peter's moral compass, and in these movies she's kind of rude. But I'll get into that in the next movie where she is just the biggest asshole.
Ow! Says she is an asshole, shows her preventing a banker from stealing money.
Okay.
So anywho, the second half of this movie hits and you realize that we are now watching a completely different movie.
He's right. I am now watching the live-action Scooby-Doo movie. And I am not complaining.
And I couldn't be happier, honestly. This movie is so wild, and I think that's why everybody loves these movies. In the second half of the movie, we're also introduced to the actual best character, J. Jonah Jameson.
Based and Scooby-Snack pilled.
Even when I read the comics, I hear his voice in my head. Not only is his performance good, but it's like his scenes have a completely different writing staff. His lines are legitimately funny in this.
Ignoring the backhanded compliment which seems to discredit how funny the other lines are in this film, I do agree that JJ has a different vibe going for him. And it's likely due in large parts to J.K. Simmons, who prepared for the role by visiting the New York Post. This is also where he got the idea to have a telescope be a part of his office, because he noticed that the editor had one too. Peter also experiences his first taste of the city life here, which is most likely going to be drastically different to his home and school life, thus creating the contrast.
Mr. Jameson, Spider-Man.
Hoffman?
Yeah?
Hoffman!
Yeah?
To the point where I'm pretty sure he's making some of this stuff up.
Well, I have not seen much of the behind-the-scenes footage on my DVDs, but I can believe some of his lines were improvised. However, based on this early test screening, it seems that a large chunk of the character was already pre-planned before any shooting took place.
Spider-Man wasn't attacking the city, he was trying to save it. That's slander.
It is not. I resent that. Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
Also, do you guys remember that Elizabeth Banks is in these movies? Yeah, no. Nobody remembers that.
Do you mean the character or the actor? Because if you mean the character, then you are just wrong. But if you mean the actor, then sure, I guess.
So once the festival scene happens, we get a really good idea of how much this movie has completely lost it. Where before the special effects were mostly hidden or just briefly shown, this movie is now a CGI nightmare.
A nightmare? How? Why? If I had to compare the CGI in this film to some of its contemporaries, I'd say it looks way better. Hell, if I compared it to some of the CGI released today, it still comes out on top. I don't quite understand the qualifications for saying the CGI looks bad, because this might just be my nostalgia goggles talking, but I actually think it looks pretty good in places for a movie from 2002. It isn't the best aspect of these films, but it looks far from being bad.
And if you think I'm being mean to a movie that came out in 2002, let's see what a real critic has to say.
Ah, so an appeal to authority, is it? Instead of supplying your own evidence and making your own argument, you are simply going to cite the answers of someone else and claim you are right because he's a real critic.
Okay.
You know, my thumb is down on this movie, but it's sort of a split decision. When you see Spider-Man flying through the skies and leaping between buildings, he looks like an artificial cartoon character. He moves too fast, without the weight and presence of flesh and blood.
See, they even thought it looked like shit back then, so leave me alone.
But all he said was that the CGI made Spider-Man look cartoonish and that he was missing vital elements of what makes a person look real and weighty, such as flesh and blood. What this sounds like to me is that Robert's suspension of disbelief was broken due to the CGI being too unrealistic, which in all honesty is a valid critique to have of the film, especially since this was given in 2002. However, to simply say all the CGI is bad because of this just seems like an oversimplification considering the fact that the CGI was still in its baby stages around this time. The use of CGI is also not incredibly apparent, seeing that a lot of the time it's hidden behind darkness or used very sparingly, preferring the use of real props and actors to be displayed on screen, which allows for incredibly visceral moments to occur, such as the final fight between Peter and Norman. But even when they are computer-generated infidels, I still struggle to call it bad since they tend to remain unmodeled model with a shocking level of accuracy for a large percentage of the runtime. I never fell into the uncanny valley while looking at these models, an issue I usually tend to have when watching Matrix Reloaded or even more recent Star Wars media. It also helps that the film has a very vibrant and exaggerated color scheme which mitigates the aging effects for the CGI drastically. So I disagree with your opinion as well as that of the professional movie critic, since neither of you did a rather fantastic job of convincing me otherwise, helped in large parts due to Cosmo refusing to give more than a few seconds of insight into what Robert said.
This part here always kind of bothered me too. See, Goblin has these fucking bombs that turn people into skeletons. Yeah, for real. Anyway, he throws it at this balcony, and Harry and MJ are also on this balcony, like they're right next to each other. But the bomb only kills these people. Not only kills them, it fucking vaporizes them. But why didn't MJ get hit? She saw it happen. She literally watched this happen right in front of her. But she's fine. I mean, maybe you gotta be like really, really close to it. I don't know.
Oh wow, we actually got decent criticism for once. Been a while. Yeah, the use of the boogie bomb in this scene is incredibly strange for all the reasons you've just listed, but also because it calls into question every time Goblin throws a bomb and it isn't this specific style of grenade. He very easily could have killed Spider-Man several times in the film, or at the least severely harmed him had he used it more than once. And he just doesn't. Granted, there is an acceptable reason for why he doesn't in the finale, being that he wanted to experience some sort of sadistic pleasure whooping Spider-Man's ass, but no such excuse exists in the burning building scene.
Now I'm gonna show you guys a brief clip, and it showcases exactly why I love this movie, and why I think this movie is a huge joke. Everything that this movie symbolizes in my mind is in this clip.
Hello, my dear.
It's Spider-Man!
This clip has everything.
You think that clip represents everything this film symbolizes? Really? You think it represents Peter's guilt over his uncle's death, his struggle to uphold his secret identity leading to him abandoning MJ, the tragedy of Harry's relationship with his father, the moral message of with great power comes great responsibility, this fucking chair, the dangers of hasty and unethical scientific experimentation, the grip the media has over society, and this fucking chair again? You think it represents all of that?
Goofy-ass Willem Dafoe acting, screaming women, which Sam Raimi loves by the way, but I'll get into that later, and hilarious extras.
It's Spider-Man!
I did not edit that clip to be any faster, that's just the pace of these movies.
No, it's more like that is the pace of a lot of the action sequences of these movies. These films have a ton of slow moments where the audience can just breathe and soak up the dialogue and character interactions. But I suppose if you laugh at half of them, then you really aren't bothering to pay attention.
This festival scene is just really a masterpiece. I can cut out 5 seconds at any point of this whole scene, and you have unintentional comedy gold.
Again, I don't think this was unintentional. Goofy and fun? Sure, but to say these films are anything other than self-aware is just wrong.
Hold it right there! I surrender!
Oh boy.
So the scene ends with a nice 1-2 punch. First we get one of the funniest lines in the movie.
Help me to kill Spider-Man!
Really? This is your pick of one of the funniest lines? I don't understand.
And then Peter Parker kidnaps Mary Jane, and the crowd cheers him on for doing this. You don't think she needs to, like, go to the hospital? Because she was trapped under fucking rubble. And people have also pointed this out before, but that's obviously a mannequin in a Spider-Man costume, and her hair is blowing in the wrong way.
Yeah, I don't quite get why he just picks her up and swings her to this random building instead of to a hospital, or even just putting her safely on the ground so he can swing back up to recover Harry's unconscious body from underneath all that rubble before the entire structure falls completely apart. But instead you felt the need to point out the mannequin, which is the definition of a nitpick. It's not necessarily wrong to mention it, but it literally does nothing to harm the writing of the scene. It's just aesthetic. Alright.
Anyway, let's look at more goofy scenes out of context.
I'm right here.
This movie is so fucking funny. It's pretty clear that this movie is the goofiest thing to be put on film in the year 2002. I mean, the climax has the villain literally holding the love interest in one hand and a metal box of children in the other, and Spider-Man has to pick which one he's gonna save. If something this stereotypical happened in a superhero movie today, there would be public outcry about how silly it is.
I don't think this is accurate to say at all, especially since the plot of the most recent Spider-Man film literally has the main character risking the very fabric of reality in order to save 5 people's lives. And unlike this movie, that trolley problem is like half of that flick's runtime. Yet it is the 6th highest grossing film of all time. Public outcry my butt.
But to top it off, you get the funniest line in the whole movie. And I mean it. Out of everything I've shown you guys, this line is my favorite. I have memorized this speech. It is truly iconic to me as one of the greatest and cheesiest superhero movie monologues.
Spider-Man! This is why only fools are heroes. Because you never know when some lunatic will come along with a sadistic Swiss neck guy, what do you know? Or suffer the little children.
Truly a masterpiece. As a regular superhero movie, I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10. But as a comedy, 10s across the board, baby. Comedic gold.
Don't tell Harry.
That was the definition of ligma in terms of a review. I feel like I've gained less than nothing from it, and that I am starting to think that the dislike ratio is well and truly deserved. If I had to summarize this segment in just 6 words, it would be smoking dick and sucking dick, baby! Here's hoping the Spider-Man 2 section is better. It's not.
Cool Spidey outfit.
Thanks.
So now we've arrived at the Citizen Kane of Spider-Man movies, or so people say. Spider-Man 2.1. That's the one I have, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It won't matter anyways.
Now, while the point of this video is to bring up the crummy aspects of this movie and kind of laugh at it, I gotta admit that it's 100% undeniable that this is the best movie out of the trilogy.
Is it though?
It's way funnier than the first one, it has some good emotional moments, and it's pretty exciting to watch.
Emotional moments which rely on incredible contrivance and sheer stupidity on the behalf of our main characters, in order to function with any element of drama. Comedy which in large parts hold up fantastically, but also belong in a movie with some incredibly unintentionally comedic moments, such as Doc Ock hitting his head on a train, electrocuting himself twice, Peter getting cuckolded at MJ's engagement party, Doc Ock throwing a car at the only person who knows where Spider-Man is, and Harry not figuring out that he can kill Doc Ock instantly when he isn't looking, using the gun he pulled out at the end of the last film. Because continuity is for pussies. I do agree though that the movie is pretty exciting to watch. I can't help but enjoy myself whenever I watch it. Except for you. Fuck you.
But it still has dumb shit. So, let's start off with another Peter Parker narration.
Who am I? I'm Spider-Man, given a job to do.
Bleh.
You are made of stupid.
Now, I would run through this movie scene by scene like I did for the last movie, but this movie's kind of hard to do that for, and I'd also be here for a really long time. I'm trying to go to bed.
Oh, don't worry. I noticed. It happened right around the time you started speaking. Hi guys, and welcome to Wendy's. May I take your order?
This movie follows a little bit of a formula, but not the same one as the last movie.
You guys remember when he said these movies are basically the same? Because I'm sure as shit he didn't.
In this movie, everything revolves around Peter Parker being shit on. And I know shitting on him is kind of half of the whole thing about being Spider-Man, but that's exactly my point. It should be half of the story.
Again, just right out the gate with bad opinions. There shouldn't have to be a limit on the amount of shitty things that happen to Peter. If the entire film was just one big dump on him as a person, it would have been fine as long as it was executed well. The problem with this film is that a lot of the shit that happens to Peter is not only his fault to begin with, but is also largely avoidable if he used a percentage of his supposedly big Brian. Take his relationship with Harry, for example. Now, this is a point I made in my Spider-Man 3 video, so feel free to check that out if you'd like. But something I came to a relatively quick conclusion to was the idea that Peter should have informed Harry about what happened to his dad, since the police clearly didn't tell him. And no, I do not accept what No Way Home says. That movie is bullshit and will be thrown into the sea soon enough. The reason for why I think Peter should have told him is because Peter understands the desire for revenge and what it can do to a person if left unchecked. It is also actively harming his relationship with Harry, someone he considers to be his best friend, so allowing him to essentially live in constant ambiguity on what happened seems incredibly harmful to his psyche. And just paints Peter as a prick, honestly. The same logic applies to his relationship with MJ, as I am one of the few squirrels on this planet who think the idea of keeping your identity a secret from those that you care for is incredibly unhelpful, especially if these people get kidnapped and used against you anyways, just like MJ and Harry already were. That's just one example, but the core issue with Peter is that he never tries to resolve the situation, thus creating unfulfilling drama.
Rewatching this movie is really frustrating because everybody is an asshole.
Not everyone.
Mary Jane is an asshole.
Correct.
Aunt May is rude as fuck.
Incorrect.
Harry is the biggest piece of shit ever.
Correct, but to be fair, he has his reasons, and as I explained earlier, it benefits Peter if he tells him what happened.
This movie is just unrelentingly mean. The first thing Harry says to Peter in this movie is, "Hey, your friend Spider-Man killed my dad, and I fucking hate you." And then they start talking about other stuff. And then he's like, "No, but seriously, I really hate Spider-Man, and I hate you, and this is why Uncle Ben died."
I assume this interpretation of that scene has something to do with the fact you watched the 2.1 cut of the film, which includes deleted scenes, such as the moment where Harry tries to garner sympathy from Peter by appealing to his own desire for revenge against Uncle Ben's death. The problem with this interpretation of that scene is that it actively ignores what happens next.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to rag on you anything like that. You're my buddy, you know that. Your family, Pete. My father loved you. You were like a son to him.
Thank you, Harry.
Now that's a little awkward, innit?
Every chance Harry gets, he talks about how Spider-Man killed his dad. Even when Spider-Man saves his life in the beginning of the movie, he doesn't even skip a beat. He's just like,
"This doesn't change anything."
God damn, dude, you are really petty.
He says to the man who thinks Spider-Man murdered his father less than 2 years ago. Fucking dumbass.
It also doesn't help that James Franco's acting is kind of shitty in this movie.
Agreed.
I'm ruined. I have nothing left except Spider-Man.
And then we have Aunt May, who nags the shit out of Peter Parker in every scene that he's in.
Nag? Nag? She nags the shit out of him? And you use this scene as evidence for that pigeon-shitting, binges, drinking Cheetos, finger-typing, chalkbook, lickingly stupid opinion?
Can't. Stop. Stop. None of this.
Who nags the shit out of Peter Parker in every scene that he's in.
Ooh, don't clip that. Please. Come on now.
In the example you use, Aunt May breaks down in tears due to the fact she is incapable of giving her surrogate son a decent birthday present, resorting to her last $20 since that is all she can afford. Peter initially declines this as moments before talking to her, he notices an eviction notice, signaling to him that Aunt May doesn't have enough money to continue paying off the house. Upon trying to decline the money, Aunt May gets angry and demands that he takes it because she cannot bring it upon herself to give him nothing on his birthday, which then leads to her reminiscing about Uncle Ben. This scene, along with the additional baggage of the first film, are the two biggest contributing factors for why he comes clean to Aunt May during Ben's anniversary, because the guilt is eating him up too much and he cannot live with it anymore. You leaky petrol tank.
She abuses random people.
Ow! No, she isn't trying to kick Mr. Jackson the scene, she's trying to kick Peter to get him to shut up. The context of the scene has Aunt May trying to appeal for a loan at the bank, and in order to attempt to do so, she says she gives piano lessons again as a means of proving she makes a high enough income to justify the loan. Upon hearing this, Peter responds with,
"You are?"
Ow! Clearly in disbelief at this news. In an attempt to get Peter to shut up, she tries to kick him, but clearly misses and hits the man behind the desk instead. It was an accident, Marquez.
And in the most egregious instance of mischaracterization, she makes Peter feel more guilty for Uncle Ben's death. At a crucial point in the movie, Peter is like, "Hey, Aunt May, it's been eating me up inside. I basically caused Uncle Ben's death. I didn't know how to tell you, and I'm so sorry. All I want is forgiveness." And she's basically like, "Wow, you're a piece of shit. Bye." And then she just leaves. She leaves him there.
I miss 10 seconds ago. When I had not seen that.
So you not only misinterpreted the scene, you not only do not understand what a combination of grieving and shock looks like on a person, but you also just went ahead and made up shit about what she says, either for a joke or because you really are just knee-deep in ketamine. This is such a stupid. Oh, I'm sorry. The stupid alarm just went off again. My bad. But what Stupid Alarm Shandy was trying to say was that this was an incredibly bad point, and that you should be ashamed blamed for making it. You just any percent speedrun yourself into a little black box I like to call the takes up too much space box, because I don't want to have to deal with seeing or hearing much from you again after this point. Into the garage you go. I feel like there really isn't much point in explaining what you got wrong here exactly, since I'm sure that 99% of the people who dislike this video know what you got wrong, with the remaining 1% being their dogs. But for the sake of the 9 million people who saw this video and didn't downvote you, I think I should. Just before the scene starts, we have an establishing shot of Peter and Aunt May visiting the grave of Uncle Ben. According to what May said during this scene, that you also Patrick Wilhelmsed, this day is special because it is the anniversary of when Ben died in Spider-Man 1, so naturally, emotions are still pretty fresh. It's also the scene which establishes Aunt May saying, "If I met the person who was responsible, I don't know what I would do." With this in mind, we now fast forward back to when Peter and May sat down in their living room. Peter tells Aunt May that she doesn't need to keep blaming herself for what happened that night, and that it wasn't her fault. Aunt May responds by saying that she knows but still feels responsible anyways, because if she had only just told Uncle Ben not to take Peter to the library, then they would all be sitting here drinking tea together. In response to this, Peter takes responsibility for what happened. Jesus, that's a lot of response sounding words one after the other. Okay, for what happened that night, and explains all of the events which led up to Uncle Ben's death. Now, something you have to understand is that on this day, it has been 2 years precisely since Uncle Ben was killed. So in all that time, not only was Peter abstaining from explaining what happened out of guilt, but it also means Aunt May had to live with the idea that she was responsible for Ben's murder. What this means is you are now facing a situation where 2 years of pain and anger and grief are hitting you all at once while you look directly into the eyes of the man who claims was responsible for taking your husband's life. The only problem is that this person is also your nephew, whom you have raised as a son for most of his life. Aunt May as a character has also been established as someone who can help comfort Peter no matter the situation, as well as being depicted as a very emotionally strong woman with some moments of weakness. So the fact she gets up and leaves while saying literally nothing tells you exactly how much this information has shocked her to her core. This is an entirely appropriate response to have regarding information this world-shattering, and the fact you were too much of a pickled peanut to understand this really speaks to me about your credibility as a critic. Fuck you.
And now for something completely different.
Even when Peter comes back and he tries to talk about it again, you know, to get some closure, she's basically like, well, you fucked up, but whatever. This is not Aunt May, and it makes me really mad. But even though Aunt May has the worst scene, and she's one of the worst characters in the movie...
Well, good for you, you're wrong.
She still isn't the #1 worst character. No, that award goes to Mary Jane Watson. The most petty and manipulative person in the entire series.
Correct!
She spends the whole movie fucking with Peter's emotions. At the end of the first movie, he's like, hey, listen, I'm sorry, we can't be together. You know, I gotta do my own thing. It's sad, but hey, he's being straight with her. And in their first scene in this movie, she tries to make the moves on him, and he's like, hey, whoa, hold up. Yeah, no, I'm still trying to be friends here. I don't want to date you. And she's like, oh yeah? Well, fucking kiss me, you pussy. Look how cute I am. I baked you a fucking cake. And he's like, okay. Oh boy, yeah.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yes, sir! This nigga's spitting!
And she's like, admit you love me. Admit you love me, Peter. And he's like, no, I don't want to. So she takes it easy. You know, she backs off a little bit. She doesn't freak out or anything, except she does this shit.
Sexual harassment.
And then a second later, she turns around and she's like, oh, well, you know what? I have a boyfriend anyway, so fuck you.
And by the way, I have a boyfriend.
I'm not sure exactly why you'd bring that up.
It's super serious, and you do not want to mess with him.
Okay.
And she seriously says it just to fuck with him.
This man be eating just the right amount of wheat picks on this one.
But then you learn that she's only fucking this other guy because she's mad at Peter Parker. She agrees to marry him right after she yells at Peter Parker. It's just because she's mad at him.
No, we were this close to perfection. MJ isn't marrying John just to fuck with Peter. The lady still wants her life, man, like, goddamn. Sure, it might seem shitty to do these two things one after the other, and don't get me wrong, it absolutely is. But it don't mean the girl should just abandon all of her options after Peter said, nah bitch, and fucked up his reservations to grind that ass like it's Pro Skater 2. This was like the easiest thing to criticize because you just have so much ammo to use against her. And yet, you still managed to fuck it. You still managed to fuck it like dumb cunt.
Punch me, I bleed.
Blech.
You are made of stupid.
Then in the weirdest scene of the movie, she has this fucking experiment with her fiance where she makes him kiss her like Spider-Man kissed her in the first movie. What if your girlfriend went up to you and was like, hey, can you kiss me like this one guy used to kiss me? This one guy that I just kissed in an alleyway one time? I just want to, see what it feels like. What the fuck? No!
Marcus, I'm genuinely beginning to think you downloaded the wrong movie or something because Jesus Christ, that is not what happens. She gets up to go and kiss him and doesn't tell him for what reason. The homie was just chilling and got some lip while on the sofa. Why would he be complaining? She literally says nothing like what you just described. What the fuck are you smoking?
But that's not the only frustrating plot device. Dr. Octopus is also a big dumbass.
Correct!
Firstly, he has this extremely dangerous demonstration in his fucking apartment with no protective gear given to anybody in the room other than goggles for himself.
Yes.
And then when he turns evil, his entire supervillain plot is, well, I gotta finish my science experiment. Might as well. I get that you're supposed to be crazy now because of the AI of the metal arms, fucking with his mind. But why the fuck do they want to finish the fusion reactor? What do they care about sustainable energy for? I don't get it.
These 4 actuators were developed and programmed for the sole purpose of creating successful fusion.
He's one of the best characters in the Spider-Man universe with really complex goals and motivations. But here he's just a fucking goofball. I will say, though, that one of the best scenes in the movie is definitely the fucking horror scene that plays at the end of the first act. This is so reminiscent of Evil Dead that it makes me kind of giddy. Like, look at this. Tell me this is not from Evil Dead. For real.
I wouldn't know, I haven't seen it. Oh, boo yourself, I know where you live. But I agree, the scene is fantastically put together and is immensely entertaining, both because of the shenanigans of the arms and because of some of the goofy shit the extras do. Look at this dumbass doing the Sunday jig like he's at a fucking Kanye West-led choir. Instead of running for his life and phoning the police, he decided to go for a new high score in Dance Dance Revolution.
And to top it off, this scene is full of the other staple of this trilogy, screaming women. I mentioned it briefly before, but Sam Raimi loves screaming women. Even when the movie isn't being campy and it's not being serious, it's just being really awkward. Tobey Maguire can't have a normal scene with somebody.
We sure showed him.
What do you mean, we?
Oh.
It's almost like he's a socially awkward teenager / young adult and is always depicted as a giant goofball throughout the trilogy.
So anyway, Peter Parker beats up Dr. Octopus, he tells Mary Jane he's Spider-Man, and then she leaves her fiancé on their wedding day and decides to be with Peter Parker. Which is fucked up, but whatever.
Welcome to another installment of The Audacity of This.
Oh, she also says that she doesn't mind that he's Spider-Man and she'll do whatever it takes to be with him, and that she'll be there for him no matter what. Except in the next movie where she leaves him because he's Spider-Man.
This is an incorrect statement and makes me want to commit uninstall all appliances.
Anyway, this movie's dumb as hell, 7 out of 10, I love it.
Oof, seems awfully high for a movie that is allegedly worse than I remember and has this as the thumbnail. But oh well, consistency in a Cosmonaut video is about as rare as finding who asked. Moving on.
I like being bad. It makes me happy.
Okay, so everybody knows that this movie is bad, and I'm not about to talk shit about Spider-Man 2 and go ahead and say this one's good.
Pussy.
And I almost wasn't even going to talk about it because everybody already knows the funny things in it, but I can't help it. This movie's hilarious. However, while the movie is bad, it's actually pretty consistent in its tone.
They all are. What?
This still feels like a Spider-Man sequel, even if it is a really stupid one.
How's the pie?
So good.
Oh, so just like the prequels then. I swear, most people are just way too scared to comment on some of the silly shit from the first two movies out of fear of being crucified on Twitter or some shit. Fucking cowards.
So this movie goes ahead and starts off with another...
It's me, Peter Parker.
God damn it.
I agree. God damn it. You'd think you would have gotten better at criticizing these movies as we went on, but you still consistently managed to be wrong on most things you say, such as the opening narration. Fucking hamburger and chippy moment right there.
You think after 2 movies he'd probably get good at this, but no, he doesn't.
Smells like another bad opinion in here, boys, and goodness gracious does it stink worse than wet Jacob in imprinting season. Woo!
Now if you ask me, the best part about this movie is the fact that the wackiness starts at the very beginning. It's not a gradual build-up like it is in the last 2 movies. This movie starts off as a shit show.
Oh yes, because Peter almost kamikazing into his boss the first time we see him, only to deliver a pizza like it's a fucking side mission, wasn't incredibly goofy to start the movie off. How about the flick that literally had Peter chasing a school bus? That was super serious and not at all reflective of the rest of the goofy shit in that movie, wasn't it? You dirty snow globe. Honestly, saying that this film starts off wackier than the first 2 is fine because this one has a lot more shit crammed into it, but my issue is pretending like this is the only story to start off with silly shit and that the previous film shied away from having such a goofy opening. We literally started Spider-Man 1 with this iconic line.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Goofy and heartfelt. These are the terms that I would use to describe this franchise, like it's its bread and butter, and it is a consistent implementation throughout these films.
At the 10-minute mark, we already see 2 antagonists. Harry starts juicing with the goblin serum, and a fucking meteorite lands in Central Park with the symbiote. This movie's trying to juggle all of this shit at once, and it really doesn't work. Also, the symbiote coming from outer space is fucking stupid. I know that's how it is in the comics, but there's a lot more context in the original story. With everything that we know about this universe so far, telling me that aliens exist is kind of a stretch.
Why? Why is this a stretch? Peter lives in a world with self-sustaining man-made suns, super soldier serums, flying elves, and hair growing on his hands that allows him to stick to buildings. Aliens existing just seems like another Tuesday in this franchise. However, I do agree that the method of how he arrives on Earth is incredibly bullshit, and I explain more in my review of this film. Honestly, the way it was handled in Venom was far more preferable, but I digress.
So after all that, Harry ambushes Peter and tries to fucking murder him in the street. We are not even 1/6 through the movie at this point. Now, all things considered, I actually like this fight. It's pretty exciting. We know Peter isn't gonna die because the movie just fucking started. But the main thing at risk here is the wedding ring. It adds an extra threat to the fight, and it's good for making the audience engaged.
I'm glad you also like this fight, not only because it's my second favorite engagement after the final fight with Green Goblin in the first film, but also because it's the best fight in the series. This is also something I explain further in my review, but the shorter answer is that Peter and Harry both use their abilities in a competent manner throughout the fight, which is an issue that the series has faced in almost every single conflict before this point. And while the loss of the ring may add an extra layer of engagement, the way Peter gets it back after losing it initially is kinda bullshit, but still good fight.
Now right after this scene, we're thrown into the Sandman's origin story, because like I said, this movie has no fucking breaks.
It's weird you say that because the scene right in the middle of these two acts as a break to allow the audience some breathing room while re-establishing the relationship between our 3 main friends. You could argue that Flint's metamorphosis in this scene is also a break since it reconstructs him into Sandman without being overbearing about it in a similar manner to the previous films or even in this film. so I disagree with this claim.
However, him turning into Sandman is actually one of the best sequences in the whole movie. The effects have aged pretty well, and with no dialogue and beautiful music, it's an excellent example of wordless storytelling.
I agree.
It's kind of weird because if you look at this scene on its own, it's kind of beautiful, but then you remember it's in the same movie as this scene, and you get kind of upset.
You say that, but both of these sequences are highlight moments for me in this film. The Bully Maguire montage is incredibly hilarious and goofy, while staying consistent with the character of Peter Parker we have been shown thus far. Line this scene up side by side with the montage from Spider-Man 2, and try to tell me with a straight face that these are two drastically different scenes. Just because a somber moment exists in a movie alongside an incredibly cheesy and hilarious one, doesn't then mean that the somber moment is any less beautiful. Else you would have issues with the entire trilogy.
Anyway, Harry has amnesia now, which, as everybody knows, is probably the worst plot device in the history of storytelling.
I don't know. The special needs kid who has special abilities plot device is pretty shitty itself, and so is Resurrection, or even the "it was all a dream" nonsense that films like Twilight were doing. Though my personal least favorite trope in media is time travel, not just because it's overused without really thinking about the ramifications of such a mechanic, but also because it literally says no you to any consequences previous installments gave us.
He seriously hit his head and forgot the entire last two movies.
Ah, I see Marcus isn't familiar with the concept of head trauma.
That is more than ridiculous. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Okay. I see this video was made in August of 2018, which means by this point, no, Shandy, don't even bother. It's not worth it. Just move on.
Oh, also, James Franco has gone from being a bad actor to being an insane one.
I got here as fast as I could.
I know that face.
Again, agree with your point, but not your choice of example. Whatever, let's just finish this.
Now, unsurprisingly, Mary Jane is still the worst character in this movie.
No. This is actually a significant improvement of her character from the last flick. Not to mention that her disdain for Peter is incredibly justified considering how much of a wet sock he has been to her in this film. And no, her behavior from the last movie does not justify this nonsense from Peter. You were just wrong, Marcus, damn. And instead of explaining why, I will again just redirect you to my review on this film as I go into great detail explaining why MJ is justified in her behavior towards Peter in this picture.
Spider-Man gets attacked all the time.
This isn't about you. This is about me.
Remember how in the last movie she's like, "Hey, I love you, I'll support your lifestyle." Yeah, well, the first time he has to go out and do Spider-Man stuff, she's like, "Ugh, I didn't know this Spider-Man shit was gonna be full-time."
Just let it go, Shandy. Don't worry about it. You know he's wrong, and you explain why in your video. It's okay.
The next scene is also really funny because we are now randomly introduced to all the new side characters. This random-ass motherfucker shows up and he's just like,
"Oh my god, that's Gwen."
I'm sorry, who are you? This is the main villain, by the way, and he just shows up randomly.
I'm sorry, the photographer just doing his job has arrived on scene to take photos and you took issue with his first appearance, despite this being exactly what you would expect from a photographer to do.
Okay.
He's also not the main villain. That would be the black suit, since it affects Peter as a character for the longest period of this film and has a dramatic impact on his life nearing the end of this movie's runtime, more so than anyone else. It also makes up half of one of the main antagonists by the end of the movie, because Venom is literally two people.
For the last time, Parker, our pronouns are they, them. Not because we are non-binary, but because we are literally two niggas.
Now, all things considered, Topher Grace's performance is not actually that bad. I actually really like it.
See, photography, it's not just about, no offense, flagpoles, whatever. It's about lighting.
Same, honestly. I think people were way too harsh in his portrayal of the character. And again, I explain why in my Spider-Man 3 video. Please just go and watch that. I don't really want to repeat myself here again. Thank you.
And it kind of upsets me that people blame him for why this movie sucks. He's actually perfectly playing the jerky, hot-headed foil to Peter Parker. He's just one of the better parts of the movie when he's not being Venom. Because when he gets the symbiote, he kind of sucks.
Wait. Did you just say only one part of what I agree with?
Once he turns into Venom, he's just...
I like being bad. It makes me happy.
Fucking ridiculous.
Well, I guess you aren't going to be invited to my treehouse party this year.
Honestly, if this movie was just about one villain, one fucking dude, it could have been fine.
Frankly, I agree with you here. But can you guess which villain I think that should have been? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that.
Harry's motivations are clearly defined all the way from the first movie, and he would have made a great villain on his own.
See, but now here's the problem. How do you take Harry as a character and as a villain, and then stretch him out through the rest of the movie without it coming off as redundant? After all, he knows about Peter's secret identity, and he has been actively trying to kill him since the 10-minute mark, as you yourself said. So unless you made some drastic redrafts of the script, then the portrayal of Harry in this film cannot work as a full-length antagonist. Because Peter knows where he lives. It also doesn't help that I have an intrinsic bias for Venom and the storyline evolving around the black suit in this film, and definitely think that if Venom and Harry were the only two antagonists in this movie, that it would have worked far better. We could still have had the tag team fight at the end against Venom, since he can easily overpower Peter, meaning that Peter would definitely need some assistance. But that's just me.
Sandman has a very compelling story, and the way he ties back to Peter could be interesting if written well.
I agree, and that's why I think he should have been saved for the fourth film.
Eddie Brock serves as a great foil to Peter, his narrative opposite. He represents something that we haven't seen in these movies yet. A person like Peter Parker, except motivated by his own selfishness instead of selflessness. Any one of these dudes would have been fine. Making a Spider-Man movie should be so fucking easy, but most of them suck.
Statistically, you would be correct in saying this. However, I don't think you and I would agree on which ones they are.
I'm so mad. So anyway, Mary Jane gets kicked out of her play because she can't sing for shit, and she sees Peter swing by, and she actually gets mad at him. Yeah, forget being supportive of the Spider-Man lifestyle. Now you're actually actively jealous of your own boyfriend.
Yeah, it's almost like she has a character-based reason for feeling this way, going back all the way to her first appearance in Spider-Man 1. It's almost like having a believable character flaw isn't inherently a bad thing for a story to possess, and can lead to interesting drama when done correctly. But ginger bad and mean.
And then she even has the audacity to get mad when he kisses a random girl that he doesn't know right in front of her. Peter, why did you do that?
I thought I was about to throw some hands there for a second. Phew!
This movie's just basically Mary Jane and Peter Parker being pissy at each other again, because we haven't seen enough of that. Because we have the same general storyline in every single one of these movies.
Wait, is that what you meant when you said these movies are basically the same? You think Peter and MJ having relationship drama in each film constitutes it basically being the same to you? The fuck? Did you just ignore the movie in between the relationship shit? Cunt!
So now Spider-Man decides to be evil, and he wears his hair different, and he says bad words.
You'll get your rent when you fix this door!
And everybody likes this part of the movie. This is everyone's favorite part of the movie. Everybody universally agrees that this is where the movie really shines.
Yeah, I don't see why they wouldn't. This part's amazing.
Now this movie has a flow, much like the others do. Wow, so wise. However, the flow in this movie is fucking insane. They just have each villain getting kicked out of the story to make room for another villain. Harry's the bad guy at the beginning of the movie until he gets amnesia. Then Sandman comes in and he's the villain until Peter murders him. Then Harry decides not to have amnesia anymore and he's the villain again. Then Peter Parker kills Harry Osborn with a bomb, and then Venom is the main villain after that. This movie is bananas.
See, none of what you just said is technically wrong, but I still feel like I should be disagreeing with you. And I don't know why. I think it might just be preconditioning as a result of having to watch this video for so long. I'm almost compelled to argue at this point, but if I don't really have anything to latch onto, then I think it's fine to just move on.
All while this is happening, we have bad acting.
It's over.
No. Please.
That's debatable, but I'll let you have this one. That scene ain't the best.
And just absolutely hilarious scenes.
Now dig on this.
Well, yeah.
The last act of this movie rushes along faster than you can say.
Oh boy, yeah.
Eddie Brock gets the symbiote, and immediately afterwards, him and Sandman just find each other wandering the streets.
Well, no.
Then they steal a taxi, kidnap Mary Jane, and build a death trap for Spider-Man. This all happens in the span of like a couple minutes.
Yes, the pacing of this final third of the film is not very slow. Some would in fact call it the opposite of very slow. Perhaps even very fast. Because that just so happens to be the opposite of very slow. Aren't I smart?
This movie is so sluggishly paced until the point where all this shit has to be shoved in immediately.
Well, that's not very true, and you even say so in your own video.
This movie starts off as a shit show. At the 10-minute mark, we already see two antagonists. We are not even 1/6 through the movie at this point. Now, right after this scene, we're thrown into the Sandman's origin story, because like I said, this movie has no fucking breaks.
Redraft your scripts, man.
Meanwhile... Oh, and then Peter goes to Harry to recruit him to fight the bad guys, but Harry is now the Phantom of the Opera and he's sad and he hides in his castle. But then the butler comes out and says that Spider-Man didn't kill his dad, and that Spider-Man is innocent.
Yeah, it's incredibly stupid, especially if you consider how much of a problem this created for the first two films. It is the dumbest retcon, even if it makes sense.
I loved your father, as I have loved you, Harry.
I'm sorry, who are you?
It's funny because it's true.
So the climax of this movie revolves around Peter saving Mary Jane. Does that sound familiar? Because it's been the climax in every single one of these movies.
Is it repetitive? Sure. Have you explained why this is a problem? No. The main character saves the people he cares for at the end of the film. Oh no, what a horrible trope. Look, I get having personal gripes with this method of creating a climax, but until you explain why it is bad, I'm going to have to chalk this up to personal preference. And to be clear, it's not like I'm saying you can't give a reason for why you think this is bad. I'm saying you failed to demonstrate that thus far.
You see what I mean when I say these movies are all the same?
No.
I don't even care. It's so funny. 4 out of 10, really bad, but I like it anyway.
I don't feel so good.
Okay, thank you for your exact 2 good criticisms on why this movie is bad. I'm sure that was really hard.
Joe's 29-minute guarantee is a promise, man.
If you ask me, all 3 of these movies honestly do make a pretty decent trilogy. People say Spider-Man 3 is the worst one, but if you watch all of them back to back, it really doesn't feel that much different from the other 2.
Besides the much faster pacing, 3 times as many villains, and good character writing for Harry, I'd actually agree with most of this assessment, because a lot of that comes down to Raimi as a director and how good he is at conveying his artistic expression in each film. Studio interference and all.
So yeah, my opinion hasn't really changed. I prefer the new movies, but at the same time I can still enjoy these movies for what they are.
And there is nothing wrong with that. Personal preference exists for a reason, and people develop different tastes in the media they consume. I just don't think you actually know what these movies are, considering how much wrong you've said so far.
Because even when they're bad, they aren't as bad as The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
You're right, they aren't as bad as that film. They are worse.
Even though I've never seen it.
Then why say anything at all?
And I'm never going to see it. You guys are never going to get me to watch that movie. Because it's not going to happen. In a million years. Maybe some other time. Bye, guys.
Bye, Marcus. Take care. And I think with that I'll be wrapping up my own video as well. Responding to Cosmo has been interesting for me because I had already seen his coverage on EFAP a few years ago, but now with the change of my perspectives on these films as well as me digging into them through my own analysis, I find it fascinating to still mostly agree with their coverage of this video. It's fucking terrible. You lack a basic understanding of most scenes you found to be poorly written, your analysis comes down to, this was so funny guys, like actually, and your references were abysmal. This is genuinely one of the worst reviews of the Raimi trilogy I've ever seen, and now I can finally understand why so many people were automatically against negative coverage of these films. They all still had PTSD from their abandoned leper of this video. Oh well, at least it's over now. Feel free to subscribe and hit that bell button if you like what I do here and if you'd like to see some more. Uploads are going to start becoming less regular thanks to a big change in my life this last month, but have no fear, I won't be leaving anytime soon. Take care and see you next time.
Well, off to visit your mother!